Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm John Berry 555, and today I'm continuing my 10th anniversary reviews of Star Wars Rebels. So today I'm going to be reviewing Season 2, Episode 15, The Call. This episode aired on DisneyXD 10 years ago today, on February 10th back in 2016. Space Whales. This is the episode that introduces the Purgo. I remember some of the discourse back when the Purgo were introduced, and let's just say people threw out terms like filler, silly, fantasy. By the way, Star Wars is a space fantasy, which is the more fantastical side of science fiction, if you will. Depends on how you want to classify all that stuff, but regardless. The Purgo end up being really important in Star Wars Rebels in the last episode, as we know. And they even make an appearance in Ahsoka. A pretty important appearance as well. But the main thing I do want to convey is that people did not really like the Purgo when they were first introduced. They called them silly, of course. Basically, filler, I believe, was the term I mentioned, and I'm pretty sure people did mention. People were not happy with them. But in retrospect, they were important. And I would say what's done with this episode, and I feel like a few other episodes later on, well, people were really using the term filler to describe certain episodes of Star Wars Rebels. But by the time of the finale of Rebels, we saw how a lot of that filler actually tied back into the greater story that was being told. This episode was, of course, no different. Like I said, the Purgo were instrumental in defeating Thrawn. How much of the stuff had they laid out, I don't know, but even if they didn't lay it out, they decided to make this episode important. And also, too, the goal of this episode was to get fuel, because the Ghost was running on practically fumes, and the fleet, the Rebel fleet that they were part of, needed more fuel, and they got that as well as stopping a mining guild operation, which means that's fuel for the Empire. Though, it does also mean that's fuel for them to steal at the same time. So, even if you think, oh, everything with the Purgo is filler, yada yada, it's so silly. In the episode, they do strike a blow against the Empire, or against a ally of the Empire, and also abscond with some resources that's used for the rebellion. So, that does not sound like filler to me. Ultimately, though, people call it filler because it did not seem immediately tied with a greater story. Now, granted, Rebels was still, even though it had an overarching story, it was still more serialized, not serialized, more episodic than a lot of television shows at the time. You know, compared to like Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which was a series of serialized arcs. The arcs were not always in chronological order, but sometimes they were. Rebels was not as serialized as the Clone Wars, and the Clone Wars I would still say was largely episodic outside of the individual arcs, with the exception of character development. And character development is something that we continue to see throughout Star Wars Rebels. In fact, this episode has some good moments with Hera. She's distrustful of the Purgos because she's a pilot, she's a spacer, she knows all the stories of them causing harm to ships and all that. Turns out you just gotta want to give them the space and fly with them and not against them, and things turn out really well. It also helps if you have some Force users on board. But at the same time, too, she mentions that as a kid, she learned stories of the Purgo being the inspiration for space travel, but she didn't believe them, just seeing them as pests, for lack of a better term. But when, at the end of the episode, when the Purgo jumped to the hyperspace, you can almost see you do see some of that childhood wonder reignite in her. Some of that same wonder that we saw in her appearances in Star Wars: The Bad Batch, which again was a serialized story rather than a truly episodic story. And actually, that's something I do want to mention too. I've been talking about filler and all that. TV shows nowadays, or streaming shows I should say, are missing a lot of filler. Like if you turn on network TV to watch one of those propaganda procedurals, or I'm sure there's probably plenty of episodic adventures, even if there's some serialized character development. I'm sure there is. But the point is that a lot of shows like sci-fi fans like watching are very serialized right now and don't have breaks, for lack of a better term. Literally, take Star Wars. Well, probably Star Wars, because everything has really been serialized in Star Wars, which has always been the case. But Star Trek, which did more episodic stuff, but Deep Space Nine, serialized as you can be, and it's nowhere near as serialized as the modern stuff because they gave time for occasional episodic adventure to give the audience a break to remind us about some character stuff that was separate from the main story. And the thing is, that can work if you design it in such a way. And I think the reason why people started calling a lot of Rebels episodes filler was because they were seeing the overarching story, but didn't see how certain episodes were fitting into that story. But as we know, because this is a retrospective, we've already watched all Rebels, I hope, because this was 10 years ago, we know that everything does pretty much come back into play later on, or is very important in developing a character element. And in my opinion, those aren't filler. Honestly, I would say clip shows are the true filler more than any other thing, and to my knowledge, Star Wars has not done a clip show yet, and I am happy for that. If they ever did, I would let you know my thoughts on it, but clip shows are the true filler, because where is a clip show but re-showing old stuff to fill up time? At least sometimes with what people call filler, you either get character development or you get a fun romp. So you're getting something out of a clip show. Like, unless there's some good jokes about the clips coming together, which some shows like Phineas and Ferb I think did pull off pretty well. You know, they have a story to justify the clip show in this. And it also helps when it's an episodic show. Clip shows are more forgivable. But when it's not an episodic show and it's some serialized or semi-serialized, clip shows do end up being what I would consider actual filler. And Star Wars Rebels is none of that. I'm sure I'll talk about filler later on as other episodes I remember people calling filler are brought up. But I just wanted to address that here because, in all honesty, what I remember the conversations about this episode from 10 years ago is more what I'm talking about than the actual episode because it is a fairly basic episode. Ezra senses the Purgo with the Force, and he encourages what ends up being the right course of action over Hero's concerns about the Purgo. That is ultimately the plot of the episode. Sonnen, their co-workers, they're running on fumes, and they need to get more fuel for the Ghost and the rest of the Rebels. Pretty simple episode, not too much going on. But the wider discussion it led to in the fandom, or complaints I should say back then, is worth discussing because it adds that additional context and all that. And since I'm doing a 10th anniversary review, I should be considering this kind of stuff. But that's what I got to say. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you always.